Have you ever been called cold, selfish, or distant, simply because you finally decided to say no? Maybe it happened when you stopped answering late-night calls that left you emotionally drained. Or perhaps when you refused to carry the weight of someone else's problems that were never really yours to solve. In that moment, instead of being seen as someone protecting their energy, you were quickly given a label: cold, insensitive, selfish. But let's pause here. Is that truly what's happening? Or is something much deeper taking place beneath the surface? Carl Gustav Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, saw this pattern with remarkable clarity. Jung believed that much of what we call maturity is actually the difficult process of individuation, separating who we really are from the roles society has imposed on us. And one of the most misunderstood parts of this process is the setting of boundaries. To protect your mental health, to choose your own well-being over the endless demands of others, is not coldness. It is a profound act of self-respect. Yet, we live in a culture that romanticizes unlimited availability. From an early age, we are taught that good people are always accessible. That love means never saying no. That friendship means being there at all costs. Movies, stories, and even spiritual teachings glorify sacrifice to the point of self-erasure. In that distorted logic, to draw a line, to preserve your own energy, is seen not just as rebellion, but as a kind of moral crime. And that is why the moment you start to change, the moment you stop playing the role of the savior or the ever-available helper, others are shocked. But here is the truth Jung invites us to see. When you start setting boundaries, you are not rejecting others. You are rejecting a false version of yourself that existed only to please them. And that is deeply unsettling for those around you. Because if you are no longer the one who absorbs their frustrations, who solves their problems, who carries their unspoken burdens, then they are left with no choice but to face themselves. Oh yes, they may call you cold. They may say you've changed. But what has really changed is not your kindness. It is your tolerance for imbalance. You are no longer willing to sacrifice your integrity in order to be accepted. And that is not selfishness. That is freedom. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned by an invisible script that tells us what it means to be a good person. We are told that goodness is measured by how much we can give, how much we can endure, and how much of ourselves we are willing to sacrifice for others. A good child doesn't say no to their parents. A good friend is always available, no matter the hour or the cost. A good partner forgives endlessly and tolerates everything in the name of love. These are the silent rules passed down through families, reinforced by schools, and echoed by culture. Think about the stories we grow up with. In movies, the hero is often the one who sacrifices everything for others, even when it destroys them. In songs, love is portrayed as constant suffering and self-abandonment. Even religious traditions, as beautiful as many of their teachings are, often elevate the ideal of complete surrender and unquestionable self-denial. The perfect mother is the one who never complains, even when she is exhausted. The perfect friend is the one who listens endlessly, even when they are breaking inside. The perfect partner is the one who absorbs pain without ever asking for reciprocity. This is the cultural conditioning we absorb, often without even noticing. Within this distorted framework, the idea of setting boundaries becomes dangerous. It challenges the unspoken rule that love equals sacrifice. If you say no, it means you don't care enough. If you refuse to play the role others expect, you're seen as disloyal. And if you decide to preserve your mental health, you risk being cast as selfish. In this way, society creates a trap. The more you give yourself away, the more approval you receive. But the moment you start to protect yourself, suspicion falls on you immediately. Carl Jung would call this emotional fusion, the inability to separate your own feelings and needs from those of others. In this fused state, people stop seeing each other as individuals. Instead, they see one another as extensions, as tools, as emotional containers. When you are fused with someone, any act of differentiation, any act of saying, "This is mine," and "that is yours," is interpreted as abandonment. That is why boundaries feel so threatening. They reveal that you are not just a character in someone else's story, but a whole person with your own truth. And while this may sound liberating, it also explains why the first reaction to boundaries is often resistance, criticism, or even anger. Because to break free from society's programming is to question the very definition of love we've been taught. When you finally begin to set boundaries, the real shock doesn't come from you. It comes from the reactions of the people around you. And often, those reactions are far louder, far harsher, and far more revealing than you might expect. Suddenly, people who once praised your kindness begin to accuse you of being selfish. Those who celebrated your generosity now claim you have changed. Friends who relied on your constant availability are quick to say you've become distant. But here's the truth. What they are reacting to isn't your coldness, it's their dependence. Carl Jung observed that most people live in a state of emotional fusion. In such a state, one person's feelings and needs are blurred with another's. It's almost as if there are no clear borders. And so, when you introduce a boundary, a clear line that says, "This is me, and that is you," it feels to the other person like rejection, like abandonment. It isn't that you've stopped caring. It's that you've stopped carrying what was never yours to begin with. And that shift is profoundly unsettling for those who have grown accustomed to leaning on you. Think about it. If you've always been the one who absorbs family drama, then saying no means someone else must face their own conflict for the first time. If you've always been the friend who listens to endless venting, then stepping back forces that friend to confront their own loneliness. If you've always been the partner who tolerates unhealthy behavior, then drawing a line demands that your partner finally mature. In every case, your boundary exposes a truth. What looked like love was often dependency in disguise. This is why the accusation of coldness arises so quickly. It acts as a defense mechanism. By labeling you as selfish or distant, the other person avoids confronting their own immaturity, their own avoidance, their own lack of responsibility. If you are the problem, then they don't have to change. But if you are simply becoming healthy, clear, and self-aware, then they are faced with a mirror they may not be ready to look into. The shock of boundaries is not about you being cruel. It's about the disruption of a silent contract. A contract that said, "I will give endlessly, and you will take endlessly." When you tear up that contract, people resist because they realize the imbalance can no longer be sustained. And while their reactions may be painful, they are also proof that you are finally living with integrity. At this point, a natural question arises. How do we distinguish between someone who is truly cold and someone who is simply learning to preserve themselves? This distinction is crucial because on the surface, both may look the same. Both may appear distant. Both may say no. Both may step back from constant availability. But what matters is not the appearance. It's the intention behind the choice. A cold person, in the psychological sense, is someone who has shut down emotionally. Their distance is not an act of self-care, but a defensive shield. They avoid intimacy not because they respect themselves, but because they fear being seen. Coldness often grows out of unprocessed trauma, deep wounds, and a belief that to open up is to invite more pain. For the cold person, connection is a threat. Vulnerability is unbearable. Their boundaries are not doors. They are walls. They exist to keep everyone out. Emotional maturity, on the other hand, looks completely different, even if from the outside it seems similar. A mature person does not reject connection. They consciously choose it. They do not hide from intimacy. They simply understand that not every bond deserves unlimited access to their energy. Their boundaries are not walls of stone, but doors with locks. And those locks can be opened by care, respect, and reciprocity. In other words, emotional maturity is selective, not avoidant. Carl Jung described this as differentiation, the ability to be with another without losing oneself. For him, true love did not come from fusion, where two people dissolve into each other's needs and traumas. True love came from two differentiated beings, each responsible for their own psyche, choosing to connect from a place of wholeness. And this, far from being coldness, is the very definition of maturity. The emotionally mature person can listen without becoming an emotional trash can. They can support without sacrificing their own peace. They can be present without losing themselves in the chaos of others. Their no is not rejection, it is clarity. Their yes is not compulsion, it is conscious choice. This kind of posture unsettles people who still believe that love means sacrifice. To them, maturity feels like abandonment. But in reality, it is the opposite. It is the beginning of authentic connection, where two individuals meet as equals, not as extensions of one another's. The next time you are accused of being cold, ask yourself, am I building walls out of fear? Or am I setting boundaries out of love for myself and respect for others? That question is the key to seeing the difference. When you begin to set boundaries, something powerful and often painful happens. Relationships that once seemed unshakable begin to crumble. At first, this collapse can feel like failure. You may think, I must be doing something wrong. Why am I losing people just because I'm finally respecting myself? But Jung would argue the opposite. What's collapsing is not love. It's illusion. Many relationships are quietly sustained by imbalance. One person gives endlessly, while the other takes without question. One listens, while the other vents. One carries the burdens, while the other avoids responsibility. These dynamics can last for years because they are hidden under the appearance of loyalty, kindness, or sacrifice. But the truth is, they are built not on reciprocity, but on dependency. And the moment you introduce a boundary, when you stop feeding the imbalance, the entire structure begins to shake. Carl Jung saw this as a natural consequence of individuation. To become whole, you must break away from roles that were never truly yours. And when you do, those who benefited from your role as the peacemaker, the caretaker, or the rescuer suddenly feel betrayed. They were relying on your willingness to carry what they refused to face. Now, without you as their emotional shield, they must finally confront their own loneliness, their own pain, their own immaturity. And for many, that is simply too much. This is why fragile relationships fall apart under the weight of boundaries. They were never truly based on mutual love or respect. They were based on silent contracts of use and convenience. When you stop playing your part in the script, the play ends. And while this can be heartbreaking, it is also clarifying. What ends was never real. What survives is what was authentic all along. The collapse, then, is not punishment. It is revelation. It shows you the difference between bonds that thrive in truth and bonds that only existed in shadow. It forces you to let go of connections that demanded your self-erasure. And though the pain of loss is real, what you are actually losing is the false self that once kept you trapped. Jung often spoke of symbolic death and rebirth as part of transformation. The end of these fragile ties is that symbolic death. Painful, yes, but necessary. Because on the other side of the collapse is space. Space for healthier, clearer, more reciprocal relationships to emerge. And most importantly, space for you to finally exist as yourself. For Carl Jung, the process of individuation was at the very heart of psychological growth. He believed that each of us is born into a world filled with expectations, cultural roles, and family projections. From childhood, we are handed scripts. Be the responsible one, the quiet one, the strong one, the helper. We learn early how to earn approval and how to avoid rejection. But individuation means something very different. It is the lifelong process of stepping out of those imposed roles and becoming who we truly are. When you begin to set boundaries, you are, often without realizing it, entering into this exact process. Saying no to what drains you is also saying yes to what defines you. It is a statement. This is who I am, and I will not lose myself in the expectations of others. In Jung's terms, this is the moment when the ego, the conscious self, begins to dialogue with the deeper self, the organizing center of our being. That dialogue is not easy. It requires honesty, courage, and the willingness to stand apart from the collective. And here lies the paradox. Individuation is not about isolation. It is about differentiation. You are not withdrawing from people in bitterness. You are refusing to disappear into roles that were never truly yours. You are no longer just the family's peacemaker, the friend who always listens, or the partner who silently absorbs. Instead, you are becoming a whole person who chooses how to engage, when to engage, and to what extent. That freedom may confuse or even upset others, but it is the only path to authenticity. Of course, this transformation does not come without cost. Many people who go through individuation report feeling lonely, guilty, or uncertain at first. They worry they are being too harsh. They wonder if they will be abandoned. But Jung would say that this discomfort is a sign of growth. You are moving away from the unconscious crowd and into conscious choice. It is a death of the false self and a birth of the real one. Most importantly, individuation allows for genuine connection. Because only when you stand firmly in your own integrity can you meet another as an equal. Boundaries are not barriers. They are affirmations. I know myself. I respect myself. And I expect the same from you. That is not selfishness. That is maturity. And it is only from this place that authentic, lasting relationships can grow. Once you've begun setting boundaries, another challenge quickly appears. How do you communicate them in a way that preserves both your integrity and your relationships? For many people, the first instinct is defensiveness. They feel the need to justify themselves, to explain every decision, or to fight back against criticism. But boundaries, when rooted in maturity, do not need aggression. They are not about pushing others away. They are about standing clearly in your truth. Think of it this way. A boundary is not a wall meant to isolate. It is a bridge that clarifies where you stand and how others can meet you there. When expressed with clarity, boundaries do not destroy relationships. They reveal which relationships were strong enough to survive in the first place. So, how do we communicate them? It begins with honesty, spoken calmly and without guilt. Instead of saying, "I'm done with you. I can't take this anymore," a healthier approach is, "I care about you, but I also need time for myself." Or, "I want to be supportive, but I cannot always be available instantly." Notice the difference. One statement comes from resentment. The other comes from clarity. Carl Jung believed that respect is born from differentiation, the ability to stand as oneself without collapsing into others. When you communicate a boundary, you are not rejecting the other person. You are affirming both your own value and theirs. By saying no, you are saying yes to truth. You are saying yes to a relationship that is honest rather than one that survives on silent resentment. It is also important to remember that empathy without limits becomes self-destruction. Carrying another's pain at the expense of your own well-being is not compassion, it is erasure. Healthy communication acknowledges this reality. For example, saying, "I cannot solve this for you, but I can listen," sets a clear limit without closing the door. It shows care while protecting your own energy. Of course, not everyone will welcome these boundaries. Some will resist, argue, or accuse you of changing. But each time you hold firm, you reinforce a new standard for how you expect to be treated. Over time, the people who truly value you will adapt, and those who only valued your compliance will drift away. In the end, communicating boundaries with clarity is not about winning arguments. It is about living honestly. It is about saying, "This is who I am, and this is how I can show up without losing myself." And that kind of honesty, though uncomfortable at first, creates the foundation for authentic connection. So let's return to the question we started with. When someone calls you cold for setting boundaries, what is really happening? The answer is simple but profound. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming free. You are stepping out of roles that demanded your self-erasure. And you are stepping into the courage of living as your authentic self. Yes, there will be losses along the way. People who thrived on your constant availability may drift away. Those who depended on your silence may no longer feel comfortable with your voice. And those who once relied on your compliance may resent your refusal. This can be painful. It can feel lonely at first. But these losses are not signs of failure. They are signs of transformation. What falls away is not real intimacy. It is dependency disguised as love. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, always comes with the cost of leaving behind the approval of some. But what you gain is far greater. You gain clarity. You gain peace. You gain the ability to build relationships that thrive not on guilt or sacrifice, but on mutual respect and truth. Boundaries, then, are not the end of love. They are the beginning of it. Because only when two people stand firmly in their own integrity can they meet each other without masks, without games, without illusions. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: saying no is also saying yes. When you say no to manipulation, you say yes to peace. When you say no to being drained, you say yes to renewal. When you say no to the version of yourself that only existed to please, you say yes to the version of yourself that is finally alive, present, and whole. That is not selfishness, it is courage. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been called cold, distant, or selfish simply because you started to respect yourself? Have you ever felt the sting of losing relationships that only existed as long as you were willing to erase yourself? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice may be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here, we don't offer quick fixes or empty advice. We go deep into the human psyche, guided by Jung's insights, to help you live with clarity, courage, and freedom. This is only the beginning of your journey. The next step takes you even deeper, and I can't wait to explore it with you.